What's up, everybody? We are back for episode deuce, number 2 of the Resleevables on YouTube. I'm your host, Cedric Phillips, at Cedric A. Phillips on all the things, and I am joined by, so last episode you were Darius Miles' biggest fan. This episode, and I actually think this is true, you might be Arabian Nights' biggest fan.
I'm certainly on the short list, I would say. I started playing Magic in 1994 when Revised was the most recent set.
Okay.
So you start playing and, you kind of know about Alpha Beta Unlimited, some of the cards that were in those sets that didn't get reprinted and revised, Black Lotus, the Moxes, they all, had their fame at that point. But there were a bunch of expansions that came out in between Unlimited and Revised, Arabian Nights being the first of them, including Antiquities, Legends, and the Dark. And Arabian Nights was printed so short, as we're going to get into, and the cards were so much more powerful on average than the ones that you see in Legends of the Darks or Antiquities, that Arabian Nights already had a history and a sort of cachet to it before Magic even got that old. So for a set that was this small, it had an impact for me in 1994, never opening up a pack of it, much less what it is now in 2023.
By the way, he's Patrick Sullivan at Basic Mountain, but you already knew that. This is a really cool set. This really is. We did our little pre-show, went through everything, and this is it's very unique, which you will find out about. Now, of course, there are some things that everyone knows about this set, like Library of Alexandria, Basic Mountain, which is like, I don't know if the mountain from this set basically made your Twitter handle or not.
It did.
Okay, great. So it's responsible for your Twitter handle. And there's a lot of flavor, even though there isn't like a pure storyline to the set, which is really, really cool as well. So with that, we're doing Arabian Nights, and we're, of course, going to start with the facts of the set. All right, let's begin with the facts of Arabian Nights. The first ever Magic expansion. Number 1. So when you think of an expansion for anything, but certainly for a card game, it's just kind of like a little addition, right? Like, because it's not a base set, it's not setting anything, like it's not setting a world, even though this is a world into itself. But this is just like, hey, here's a couple additional extra cards, go have some fun, right? That's just all an expansion is.
Typically, although this one had an outsized impact. Keep
Sure.
in mind, when this came out, Unlimited was the most recent set. It was large expansion, but that was just a shade over 300 cards. And of those 300 cards, some of them are, 3x of each basic land. So you're really only talking about 275, 285 unique game pieces. So even though Arabian Nights is a relatively small set, certainly by modern standards, it represented 25, 30% of the total card pool.
Okay. So this was originally, Arabian Nights, intended to be released as a standalone product, and it was nearly printed, now this is a fun one, nearly printed with a yellow on pink card back instead of the blue on brown used in all cards known today, to distinguish itself from The Gathering, which was originally the name of Alpha. So the brown and blue back that we still see today on basically everything, there was almost the chance that this set didn't have that.
So I have a little bit of history here, and
Okay.
this is just what I've heard through the telling of history from people even older than me.
Sure.
Don't know if this is exactly true. The impetus behind considering changing the card back was because how would people know what set the card came from otherwise?
Okay.
It was before the idea of expansion symbols were created. Alpha, Beta, and Unlimited don't have expansion symbols. And so there was a concern of how would people know what set their cards came from. Obviously, the game breaks down pretty quickly if your one copy of Library of Alexandria has a pink back and the rest of your deck does not.
Sure.
So from what I heard, again, not verified, but from what I heard, Scaphalias, who we mentioned in the first episode, one of the forefathers of Magic, said, we can't do this. We got to figure out some other solution. And that inspired the Scimitar, the set expansion symbol, which again, still used up to today. Yeah. And the card backs maintain the same card backs that we saw in Alpha and Beta Unlimited.
So the card back that is mentioned, you will see it appear on the booster box for the set. An indication that it was indeed a last minute decision to print the set, using the standard Magic backs. I'm just thinking now that if this one was the yellow and pink, and then they had to figure out a way to design a new card back for every set. Now we are almost 100 almost 100 expansions deep, and then you think of the secret lair products and all the ancillary products, it's just like, we need a different pack. We need another different pack. That would have been insane.
Once you set aside the development of the game engine, which is obviously kind of the prerequisite to all this stuff, this might have been the single biggest decision or the most influential decision made in the history of the product.
This is probably more important than in our ABU episode where the cards could have been gray bordered, but then they did white border. This is way more significant than that.
I mean, the game breaks down, not even just in a competitive sense, but like in a casual one too. Like,
sure.
Your cards are marked.
Yeah.
And to be able to come in at the 11th hour, like you said, the booster box has that pink border on it. It was very, very last minute. But trying to imagine Magic nowadays with each set having a different setback, I think ideally, eventually they would have gotten around to it. It's not sustainable very quickly, very clearly.
I would agree.
But even that early on, it would have been potentially a catastrophe to be printing sets with different card packs.
So let's talk about the release date. Arabian Nights was released in December 1993. It was not part of any block. It was printed on sheets of 121 cards. The print run was announced by Wizards of the Coast to be 5 million cards. Now let's think about that. ABU episode, I think alpha was like 2.6. Mm-hmm. And then we saw 7 point something for beta. And then Unlimited got like the big like 40 million. 5 million Arabian Nights cards. That's it.
Now keep in mind, this is still a much smaller set than Alpha, Beta, and Limited. So in terms of relative size, there is more of this than beta, let's say, but certainly less than Unlimited.
It was available from December 1993 until late January 1994, and booster boxes contained 60 booster packs, which is quite a few boosties. Arabian Nights booster boxes are now extremely rare and cost tens of thousands of dollars. I did a little bit of research on this, and I found that in December 2003, an unopened case of 10 booster boxes of Arabian Nights was auctioned for $95,000, and that was in 2003. So I imagine now, I can't even, is that 1 Bitcoin?
It's maybe 2 years ago. Maybe there was more.
Maybe 2 Bitcoin. I don't even know.
Quite a few Bitcoin.
Suffice to say, if you want to get unopened Arabian Nights packs, even if there even still are some, it's going to be pricey.
Well, there's also a problem with boosters of this vintage. You can actually see through light through the back.
Oh, you can do the push.
Okay. So you can buy individual boosters of Arabian Nights. It's pretty safe to say at this point that if you are buying one, it's been searched and it's sort of a collector's item. I have not come across a sealed box, much less case, in many, many years, and I pay relatively close attention to this stuff.
Kind of your wheelhouse.
But $9,500 a box in 2003. We can think about what Magic singles were like. You know, a Mox is $200. Dual lands, $25. You can start scaling out to modern prices. It wouldn't shock me if a sealed case could break $1 million today.
Yeah, I get. Yeah.
And 60 packs of Arabian Nights, what are those packs going for? $2,000 a piece or whatever?
Yeah, sure.
And it's all sealed?
Yeah,
I don't know.
sure.
It's probably over $1 million right now.
Okay.
If it even exists. I don't know if there are any left out there.
Maybe there's one on a landfill. You heard about this landfill story? Maybe.
I didn't. So I did hear about it.
Okay.
I did see the photo of it just in a dump. And I thought, that's suspicious.
Okay, sure.
But I really can't spend the time and energy flagging down what actually happened here.
Yeah.
My understanding, it was discovered. People did find it.
I believe it was discovered. Modern Horizons 2, like, pallet, just in a landfill. You know, you could dig deeper into this on Reddit and Imager, and I'm sure other social media platforms. But maybe that's where the Arabian Nights case is.
I very much doubt it.
Okay.
Okay. Was there any Magic 30 in there?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Well, we'll stay tuned.
Okay.
We'll be shocked.
These cards were sold in booster packs of 8 cards, so not very many cards because the set's not very large. We'll get the exact number here in just a bit, which included 6 commons and 2 uncommons, so not a lot going on. The summer after the release, while the Dark debuted, Arabian Nights booster packs were already selling for $5 compared to the original price of only $1.50.
And, you know, with an inflation adjustment, we're talking over $10 of today's money.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you would imagine an imprint booster right now going from $3 to $10. That would be pretty dramatic, right?
Yes.
Yeah, this sold out really, really fast. I started playing Magic maybe 10 months after this set came out,
Okay.
no chance of finding boosters. If you went to the right store, you could find Antiquities, you could find Legends, you could certainly find the Dark, you could certainly find Fallen Empires. But if you were looking for boosters of Arabian Nights, tough luck.
Okay. Arabian Nights set symbol, as you mentioned, a scimitar. A nice little sword. First time that we see a set symbol. And of course, as Patrick did mention, this just became a thing moving forward, which it's a good thing that it did. It was the first set, as I mentioned, to use an expansion symbol, and the scimitar is meant to evoke the Arabian setting of the expansion, which, okay, I think it works.
Totally. It's certainly better than a pink back.
Yes.
Which is not very evocative of an Arabian setting and also causes the game to break down.
I would agree. Arabian Nights contains 78 black bordered cards. That's it. So the sets nowadays, 200, 300 cards. Expansions over the course of Magic, probably more than 78 cards. That's it for this set. 27 commons, 51 uncommons. Send it to the press.
Although it's not quite that simple.
That's true.
Because there's rarity inside the rarities that make it slightly more complicated than just send it to the printer.
Correct. So because of the relative number of uncommons in a pack, you can see some strange things happen there. If you take a look at the sheet, I'm going to run down some kind of weird numbers here for you. And our sheet breakdown, it's a little hard to understand, but we're going to do the best we can. Okay, so at commons, you'll see 1 at C1, 1 at C11, 9 at C5, and then 16 at C4. And then uncommons, you have 1 at U4, 17 at U3, and 33 at U2. The U2 one matters, not because it's a band that was added to our iPhones, but because it was considered the rares of the set. So though this set has no rares, it kind of has rares.
It has a sense of rarity.
Yes.
And some of the cards being harder to find than others, but it doesn't have the demarcated common, uncommon, rare, and then eventually mythic rare that we know today.
Correct. And because of the relative number of uncommons in a pack, as I mentioned, C1 and U3 cards are of equal rarity despite being printed on different sheets. So the sheet thing is a little complicated. Here's what you need to know. There's 27 commons, there's 51 uncommons, and the U2s on the uncommon sheet are considered the rares of the set, even though there are no rares. But again, as Patrick did mention, there are some additional cards in the set.
So I have some perspective, again, speculative, but I've worked in trading card games and whatever. So I have some guesses as to why it went this way.
Okay.
One is, in a set this small and in a booster pack this small, it's really complicated to make rares rare. Like, if you put one rare into a booster, well, that's actually going to be more common than your commons if it's 3 commons and there's way more commons than rares in the file in the first place.
Sure.
Complicated stuff.
So your commons become kind of rares then.
Yeah, which we've actually run into in some of the games that I worked on many years ago. And part of the reason that Magic usually has the same number of commons, uncommons, and rares in a set is if you start messing around with that number, soon you will land in a spot where, our uncommons are actually, each individual uncommon is actually more rare than a rare, or our commons are more rare than uncommons, or whatever.
Got it. Okay.
The second reason to do it is that each sheet that you add costs more at the printers.
Okay.
So if you can come up with some complicated algorithm and keep things to just 2 sheets, that is typically cheaper than printing 3 sheets or 4 sheets.
Okay.
So it could have been a cost-cutting measure as well.
Okay. Fair enough. Due to production difficulties, 15 commons in Arabian Nights have light or dark variants. So this is where the number of the set gets a little bit wonky depending on who you're talking to. Most collectors consider these variants to be distinct cards, and therefore a set to be 93 cards. So initially, I said the number was 78. You add the 15 of that, that means that this set, again, depending on who you're talking to, is 93 cards.
Yeah, so that's, from a collector standpoint, that is true. Most major websites that you go to buy Magic cards will have the light and dark versions separated as distinct things because some collectors prefer one to the other.
Okay.
But in terms of unique pieces, it's minus 16 off that list because it's the 15 that have 2 versions and Mountain, which we saw in Alpha.
Gotcha. Okay. If the light and dark variants are treated as distinct, that means that there are 42 commons instead of 27 commons as well. Now, you mentioned basic lands. They were to be included in the set, although 4 of them were later removed. A Lone Mountain was accidentally left on the common sheet. Now, I wonder if I know anyone that has any mountains from this set.
Well, I brought my whole Arabian Nights roll here. I mean, I got, whatever.
How many mountains do you own? You got to be 20 plus.
We're going to count them out right here. We got the roll here. I have divested myself some charity giveaways.
I've seen.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18.
I assumed you had at least 20.
I used to.
Are you going to shuffle those? Oh, my God. I mean, they're yours. You can do whatever you want with them.
They're just cards.
That's
They're
true.
just cards. All of my Arabian Nights cards will go through them. They are heavily played. Heavily played. Nothing gets me going like a heavily played Arabian Nights card. Just as a certain place and time for me.
Noted. Arabian Nights was designed by the one and only Richard Garfield and developed by Richard Garfield, Joel Mick, and the aforementioned Scaphalias.
Mm-hmm.
Arabian Nights lands have a sand-colored text box that is used in 4th edition in Chronicles. And so basically what that means is not all the land text boxes look this way, but you're going to see kind of, a sandy brown color in the lands as opposed to a mountain, which doesn't have that.
Put it up on my screen here. So the mountain has sort of that reddish hue. The other lands in the set that I have a few of here, they have that sort of gold yellowish thing that Cedric is referring to.
Yeah, let's hold up the City of Brass. Get a good clean look at that. There we go. Okay, perfect.
Shuffle these two.
Unsleeved
Library of Alexandria's place at the City of Brass. I shuffle it all. Just cards.
I just went over the facts of the set and the facts of how Patrick treats his Arabian Nights cards. When we do come back, we are going to dip into the flavor of this set, which is a little bit different than anything else we've ever seen before in Magic. All right, it's flavor time, it's story time, it's lore time, whatever you want to call it. Vorthos, I don't really care. You call it what you want. We're going to talk about what's going on in Arabian Nights. It's very unique because in Magic, it is being set in like a real life setting. Mm-hmm. The only set other than Portal 3 Kingdoms, which I cannot wait to cover. Is that horsemanship?
That is horsemanship.
Okay, I cannot wait to cover that set when we get there. To be based on a real world setting instead of planes in the Magic multiverse. So, here are the notes. Inspired by Sandman number 50, titled Ramadan, and based on the book of 1001 Nights, Richard Garfield created the set, Arabian Nights, with not only an Arabian setting, but also added many characters, locations, and events that came directly from the novel in question. All the flavor text for Arabian Nights was created in one night by Beverly Marshall Sailing. Hope I'm getting that last name right, Beverly. If I didn't, I apologize. The original head editor at Wizards of the Coast. Mm-hmm. So that's our lore notes. Now, as far as dissecting that a little bit, even though it's not on a Magic plane like we see now with all of the sets and all of the characters and legends and Dominaria and all this other crazy stuff, right? Taking a real life world and setting based off of a book and everything, it's kind of cool. I'm sure that you probably couldn't do that now, maybe for legal reasons. I can't say for sure, but these, even though there's not a storyline, obviously these cards are obscenely flavorful.
Right. It's really cool. And Magic has done a lot of sets where there's horror tropes, let's say in Innistrad or The Dark.
Yes.
That are certainly pulling from tropes from certain books or other forms of media, but are not purely derivative. You have a couple of examples of that kind of over Magic's history. You have Thorn of Eldraine, for example, is obviously pulling from Grimm's fairy tales and similar. This is a set with names like Moorish Cavalry, Bazaar of Baghdad, Library of Alexandria. These are real things from human history. And in that way, it is a unique representation of a interpretation of one world into Magic.
And again, besides Portal 3 Kingdoms, we don't see this. Now, over the next handful of episodes, we're going to get into them establishing characters and a world and the multiverse, Magicverse. Multiverse is Marvel. That's my bad. Magicverse that we see now, that we're all accustomed to, that I think they've done a really nice job of.
Do they really say Magicverse?
I think so.
Oh, this is my first time hearing that.
I think so.
And I just recoiled a little bit.
That feels like a thing they would do.
It's fine. Again, this is just old man yelling at cloud moment.
Okay. But, it is very unique what they did here. And as we're going to go through these cards here momentarily, again, dripping with flavor. If you've never seen this set before, I would argue this somehow. I think this set better than ABU. Do you think that's accurate?
Probably just due to size of the set.
Okay.
Is true. Also, you have to remember about when I first started playing Magic. It was basically pre-internet.
Sure.
And so you would go to your local shop and you would frequently play against cards that you had never seen before. Yeah. It's a very interesting experience of sealed constructed. And Arabian Nights,
I like that. Sealed constructed. That's a cool thing to say.
Because Arabian Nights was so much more powerful than the sets that came after it on the average. And because Arabian Nights was so hard to find, those cards had a real mystique to them. And so I really absorbed the cards from those sets, from that set, because even at the time with so little in Magic's sort of history and vernacular, Arabian Nights was on a different level of just prestige and coolness.
Done. Flavor, lore, storyline, Vorthos. That's in the books. When we do come back, we are taking a look at the mechanics of Arabian Nights. We're going to dissect the mechanics of Arabian Nights because, much like our Alpha Beta Unlimited episode, there aren't really any... I guess, you know what? I would say that Alpha Beta Unlimited actually has more mechanics than this set does because it does have flying and banding and everything. And this set has references to mechanics that become mechanics later on over the course of Magic. So let's start with stealing. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Aladdin and Old Man of the Sea are the first cards that allowed tapping to gain unmarked control of another permanent. So, basically you're tapping these cards and you're saying, give me that.
Right, and that's in contrast to Steal Artifact and Control Magic, which do steal things, but it's the permanent giving that characteristic. This is the first implementation of it's not really being tracked. You're sort of tracking it yourself. It's an external third-party thing.
Good mechanic or bad mechanic, stealing?
A little bit goes a long way.
Okay.
I think there is definitely a different tone and vibe to it compared to the enchantments. So it has some space there, and it does play a little bit differently. I do think the instant speed, surprise, take your thing in the middle of combat, Badalkin Shackles sort of experience is not great.
Yep.
But I give the early Magic sets a really wide berth in terms of criticizing the mechanics because any idea that's new is just sort of exciting to do. And if the power level isn't particularly high, which it isn't in these cases, then it's not really causing that much harm.
All right, let's move on to abilities activated by an opponent. If Biff Ifrit is the first card to allow players other than its controller to use its activated ability. This mechanic was later expanded upon in Mercadian Masks. This is a mechanic that I feel you know rather well.
Right, so if Biff Ifrit is a 4-mana flyer that either player can pay a green to deal 1 damage to all players and flyers.
Okay.
So it's kind of interesting in that if your opponent's playing green, they have some agency over it and they might be able to kill your if Biff Ifrit, but if they don't play green, then you have a pretty good game piece for what it is. It's inspired a variety of mechanics. The Mongers in Mercadian Masks that you just referred to, there's a variety of cards that kind of have pop back and forth with who controls it, where you can spend mana to move it back and forth, and maybe there's some tax on the upkeep. So it inspired a variety of designs. Now, in this set, there's just so many drawback creatures that this was probably just one drawback among many.
Yeah.
It felt a little bit different than the other stuff that was going on, but it on its own has inspired a handful of designs over the years.
Okay. Well, now we're going to move on to, and this is a big one for Magic, lands that could do things other than tap for mana, right? So now this is common. There are so many lands that do so many different things. Rashad Port, Stalking Stones, creature lands, all this stuff, right? But when we did our ABU episode, that wasn't a thing. And now we kick it off here with some of these lands that also produce colorless mana. Desert, Elephant Graveyard, Library of Alexandria, which we're going to be talking about a lot today. And then some of these lands do not produce colorless mana or any mana at all. Bazaar of Baghdad, Diamond Valley, Island of Wak Wak, Oasis. So let's start with some of the lands that do actually tap for mana and do other stuff like Desert, like Elephant Graveyard, like Library.
This is probably the most significant mechanical development in the set for Magic. And okay. I'm constantly blown away by this appearing in Arabian Nights so early on in the game's history. To go from Alpha Beta Unlimited, which just has the basic lands and the rare dual lands.
That's the only lands, right? I think
those are the only lands.
Okay.
To go from that to a set that has only lands that either have activated abilities, tap for colorless, or one land that taps for all 5 colors of mana and has a drawback,
Yep.
is such an incredible expression of space and growing sort of Magic's pie that way. I'm really blown away. And I reference this all the time in sort of game design stuff that I do, of just how big of an innovation this really represents. The lands that tap for colorless mana, I think, are the best of the bunch.
Okay.
Because one, there's a story and a tone to it. It's a little weird to have lands that don't tap for mana when that's kind of the core creative conceit of Magic.
I mean, that's a huge jump, right? If like you're just starting and all of a sudden you like open a booster pack with like a Bazaar or something, and it's like, did they mess up? My land doesn't tap for mana? And like having to wrap your head around that at that early stage of the game, that's just got to be a weird experience.
It also plays really badly.
Sure.
And they're sometimes really burdensome from a tracking perspective. Not really in this set because they all tap to do whatever, but further down the line, these end up being kind of laborious in different ways. The lands that tap for colorless, I think, are really cool. Just one, as an expression of space and sort of growing Magic's mechanical pie a little bit, but also because they very naturally help against mana flooding.
Yep.
And they encourage players to play with more lands. Because if you have a land that's useful later on in the game for whatever it does, then you play with more lands in general. You get land screw less often. So it's no surprise that Magic makes 1 million lands that tap for mana and have some other power here. But it all started here.
And they're still... We talked about this a little bit in the ABU episode, but, you know, lands are still fan favorites. Mm-hmm. People want to know what's the land cycle, and then... Oh, cool. Like, what other lands are going to be in the set that do unique things? Do they cycle? You know, do they deal damage? Are they creature lands? Like, it's still, I'm not going to say it's the best part of Magic, but like when a new set does come out, it's where people do gravitate towards, competitive or otherwise.
Yeah. Well, with competitive play, there's an understanding that if a land taps for mana and has a power, there's a really good chance that it's a constructed player. Mm-hmm. They're regularly over-indexed and on purpose. So for competitive players, there's just an understanding that there's going to be a lot of power to these things. They also define what's possible in terms of mana bases in standard, suggest, you know, how easy it is to play 2 colors versus 3 colors. So they're really interesting in that respect. And I think for players of all sort of experience levels and calibers, the fact that it's a card that just stays in play, there's something really nice about the permanence of lands in terms of getting emotionally connected to them and really enjoying the ones that you happen to play with. It is, in my opinion, part of the reason that Magic ultimately went with Planeswalkers, is they wanted to have their storyline characters be in play for longer than creatures are typically in play. Okay. They can achieve that through Planeswalkers, so you get the satisfaction of looking at your favorite game piece for 2 or 3 or 4 turns. And so lands with powers sort of tap into all that stuff.
Let's get into Cumulative Upkeep. A fan favorite, or maybe not so much. Now, this set doesn't technically have a card that says Cumulative Upkeep on it. Cyclone is the first card to use this mechanic ability, however you want to define it, although it didn't use the keyword, as I mentioned. They were called win counters. Mm-hmm. But that is the advent of Cumulative Upkeep, which back in our podcasting days when we covered this in Cold Snap, maybe not the best mechanic.
It is horrible as a mechanic. And actually, interesting enough, Arabian Nights gets it right the first time.
Okay.
One card that has effective cumulative upkeep in a set, that's fine. Whatever, it's one card, it's a thing to think about. If you don't want to play with it, that's fine. There's 1 million other cards to play with. A set built around cumulative upkeep is you don't have a choice but to play with the cumulative upkeep cards. And they are not that much fun.
No, they're not.
So sometimes they got it right the first time. One design, not keyworded, fine, whatever, not causing any harm. We go to Ice Age, very different story.
Sure. You're big on this. This is a thing I've learned about you over the years. When we were talking about like the ward cycle, and you're just like, you know, you can just do 1. You don't have to do 5. Like, that's a big thing for you now, I think, which is you don't have to do a ton of a thing. You can just do like 1 or 2 of a thing, and then just, I don't know, see how it goes, or just decide 1 or 2 is enough.
Yeah, a couple of things. It's really reductive, but I think, you know, there's a lot to it from how I view these things in game design. Is 1, you can just do 1.
Yep.
It doesn't have to always be a cycle. It's fine to do 1 of random cards every now and again, even if they don't play the best. But once you do the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, the opportunity cost really goes up because that starts defining what the experience actually is. And the second is it can just be bad.
Sure.
Like you can just make a card and maybe it doesn't play all that well, or there's concerns about X, Y, and Z. And often the answer can be, well, why not just make it weak? Something that's very common with novice designers is, well, we either have to do it at the right rate or we have to cut it. And often, and I was certainly arguing that sort of stuff 10, 15 years ago a lot more frequently. And now I'm just like, yeah, it's just add a mana. Doesn't make it bad. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. It's cool to do different stuff. Different stuff makes the universe feel big, and it gives people things to think about. And every card is someone's favorite card for a weird reason. So there's a lot of argument to make variety, but not everything has to be the same power level.
Let's get into another mechanic that doesn't use the keyword, but we do see it nowadays, and it's lifelink. El Hajjaj was the first creature with lifelink. Again, even though it didn't use the keyword, much like Cyclone, did not use Cumulative Upkeep, but El Hajjaj did inspire Spirit Link, which then has inspired many other lifelink cards over the course of Magic's history. And nowadays, lifelink is that's just normal. You just throw it on cards, make it an aura or something, and it's totally normal and fine, and everybody kind of has an idea of how good it is. But it all started with this one.
And El Hajjaj is a subtle masterpiece. It is just an appealing card on its own. Obviously, it's pretty weak, but gaining life for hitting someone, there's a good story there, and people enjoy doing that. Also, El Hajjaj is, in my opinion, really the game's first Bogle.
Okay.
It was the first thing that's really appealing to put auras onto. If you go back to Alpha Beta Unlimited, there's, Holy Strength and Unholy Strength, there are a couple of other examples of that. But by and large, the strongest creatures were in the Shivan Dragon, Sarah Angel, Mahamodi Jin sort of space, where, yeah, it's fine to put an enchantment on it, but you really don't feel that you've done something greater than the sum of its parts. Putting it on Holy Strength on El Hajjaj is, you're doing it.
Sure.
This card got way more powerful due to the enchantment you put on it. And it's not surprising that this is inspired, as you mentioned, Spirit Link, the entire mechanic, but just creatures in general that are appealing to put auras or equipment onto. This is probably the first one.
Okay, the OG. We had -1/-1 counters in the form of Unstable Mutation, which nowadays we see -1/-1 counters, I'm going to say generally in black. But, there's mechanics where you have to, put a -1/-1 counter, maybe across the color pie in order for an effect to happen, something like that. But to see it actually kick off in blue is maybe a little surprising.
I would guess, again, speculative, but whatever. My best guess is they identified that there really wasn't space for blue to have auras that modified stats.
Okay.
If you look at the first sets, Alpha Beta Unlimited, you have Fire Breathing, which is very red. You have Unholy Strength, asymmetrical, but pumps more power. You have Holy Strength for white, asymmetrical, more toughness than power.
Yep.
And you have green, Aspect of the Wolf, which is symmetrical, essentially. So I could imagine just looking at this and be like, well, what are we going to do for blue? What feels like a blue thing? I think Unstable Mutation's fudging it a little bit. As you mentioned, I think it is a more appropriate design for black, and it's a little weird to do here. But I could imagine it's set 2 of this game, and someone says, hey, how are we supposed to do a stat aura for blue? All right, let's try this and see if there's anything there.
This feels like a very try it, throw it at the wall. It's one card.
And extremely popular.
Yeah.
And plays pretty interesting. Like a lot of what kind of is rough about creature enchantments is, one, once it happens, it's static. This is naturally dynamic.
Yep.
And 2, a lot of the game becomes about, can you kill the thing with an enchantment on it? And Unstable Mutation has a natural out of, well, the thing is eventually going to die, even if it got this buff. So chump blocking a creature with Unstable Mutation is much stronger than chump blocking a creature with a normal creature enchantment on it. So there's a lot of good stuff going on here. It's a little dissonant for blue, but again, I would imagine that figuring out something for blue to do in this space was part of the motivating reason.
And now, another hoser. So ABU hosers were tough. Yeah. Tsunami, Flash Fires.
They got nothing on this. They got nothing on this.
City in a Bottle. It's the first, I have quotes in my notes, expansion hosing card. That's probably for the best that we don't see many of these. They're all gone. They're all gone. This, I'm very curious about I don't think I'm that curious how it got through. I guess I can see it. It's the early stages of the game, but wow.
My guess is the sideboard cards, color hosers, whatever you want to call them, in Alpha Beta Unlimited are so egregious. And my guess would be, well, if you're assuming not that many people have the cards, you assume that some people have much larger collections than others. You need to give people easy to find tools to sort of shore up the difference in power level between their new deck and their friend who's been playing for a year's deck.
Sure.
And so, yeah, your opponent, your buddy keeps beating you with their really powerful mono white deck. Okay, grab some Flash Fires and now we have a game. not a perfect solution, but I can understand it.
It makes some sense.
So I would imagine what's going on here is a combination of storyline / tone, and also let's give people a tool to answer all cards from Arabian Nights. It's a little bit weird in the set too, because King Solomon's also a design. Now there's Jins and Ifrits in Alpha Beta Unlimited, but the lion's share are in here, and that's essentially a set hoser.
Sure.
So, and that card was actually good enough to sideboard in like 1995 Type 1.
Okay.
Because the Juzam, Serendib, Urnam style creature was so popular. So it's actually the total set hoser, and then King Solomon's sort of like the normal set hoser.
Yeah. Okay. That takes care of all of the mechanics, but we do again have some creature types that were introduced in Arabian Nights. Now, in our ABU episode, we did a little game where you did quite well for yourself. So congratulations to you. This time, we're going to play less of a game. We're going to get through these. These are a little interesting. I know you have some comments on some of them, but we're going to flow through these. We're going to be a little gameless this time around. Aladdin was changed to human rogue. Alibaba changed to human rogue. Ali from Cairo changed to human. Again, these are all creature types that were introduced in this set. Ape, Asp, which has been changed to snake. Bird Maiden. It's going to come up later. Gonna get changed to human bird. Camel. Calvary, which was changed to human knight. Dan, which has been changed to fish. Devil, Ifrit, Egg, El Hajjaj, changed to human wizard. Elephant, Flying Men, which has been changed to human. Guardian, which has been changed to beast. Island Fish, your boy.
Island Fish Jasconius.
Just changed to a fish now. Jackal, King, which has been changed to human. Leper, which has been changed to human. There are some fun creature types. Merid?
Yeah, Merid, I don't know.
Merid,
sure.
maybe it's Merid. Changed to Jin. Nomad, Raider, which was changed to warrior. Sindbad, which was changed to human. Singing Tree, which has been changed to a plant. Smith, which was changed to human. Sorceress, which was changed to human wizards. That's Sorceress Queen. I know that one. I used to lose to that one with my friend I grew up with. He had like 3 of those things. I just busted. Can't kill that thing. Tortoise, which was changed to turtle. And Witch, which was changed to human wizard. So, any interesting stories about any of those cards or creature types that stand out?
So I really don't think even at this time you're supposed to do leper.
Sure.
Even grading on the curve.
Sure.
One is, it sort of sounds like the person is defined in totality by their affliction. Just not,
yes,
not great. And also the mechanic of this one, it gives leprosy.
Also maybe not great.
So again, probably not a thing you're supposed to do. I give a wide berth for this time in Magic's history, but
1993.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to do leper.
Yeah.
I don't think you're supposed to do leper. I don't think you're supposed to do leprosy matters. I think that's just not design space you're supposed to mine. But fortunately, I think Magic has learned from that.
Mechanics done. Some interesting ones to be sure. Now we take a short break and we come back. We're going to take a look at the cycles. Buckle up because this one's going to be a little lengthy. All right, we're back. It is cycles time. And I lied to you because I'm not a nice person. Arabian Nights has no true 5-color horizontal cycles, like basically no cycles. The closest that they got for cycles is there are 4 Ifrits and 4 Jins. Neither one has a white version, so black, blue, red, and green for both Ifrits and Jins. Now, according to Richard Garfield, the reason for this is that Ifrit and Jin did not seem to be believable in white, as while they're not always evil, they were never good, and white was the good color in Magic at that stage, and I still think it is mostly reflective of being a good color. So this is an example, in some respects, of what you talked about earlier, which is you don't have to force all 5 of a cycle. And this is them doing that basically, and I think kind of for flavor reasons mostly, but also ultimately like for the right reasons, which is it just doesn't make sense. So why would we do it?
Well, I would critique a little bit on the execution here is that if you're going to do 4 out of 5, that actually starts becoming weird.
Okay.
1 is a random design, 5 is a cycle, 4 is just feels like there's a missing piece. And I think that when you do that, it's best to counterbalance it with giving that color that's excluded its own thing. Okay. And that's really lacking from white in the set. It is just a bunch of random French vanilla creatures, basically, and Shahrazad. So I agree with you insofar as from a creative perspective, yeah, Jins and Ifrits, they're not appropriate in what we don't do it.
You're agreeing with Richard Garfield.
Yeah.
Not me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I buy that argument. That makes total sense to me, but I wish white had a little bit of different definition in the set, and it's really lacking. It's really the first true white set. None of the cards are good, and there's no defining characteristics whatsoever. It'd be weird to have it as your favorite color. I guess there's kind of a colorless land. The elephant graveyard is sort of more white centric because white has elephants in the set, but I am straining. Even by my standards, I'm straining.
So you kind of beat me to it insofar as this is kind of the first white set, as you said, because even now, in 2023, as we're recording this, over the past year or two, Wizards of the Coast has even been like, we're having trouble with white. We don't really know how to make it great. We understand that white is underpowered. This happened more so, I'd say 2 or 3 years ago on the mothership and everything of just we're working on it. We've identified that it's not where it needs to be. It does need to be a more powerful color for Commander and Constructed and all these other things, right? And this has been a problem over the course of white's history, which is so interesting to me, which is, we see this example here with no Jin, no Freed. Okay, sure. But white has traditionally, which for the record, it's my favorite color in Magic, it has traditionally just been the weakest color or the color that kind of just fails flavor-wise in some respects. And there hasn't been a clean solve to that yet. They're actively trying, and I think they've done better, but they still haven't given white its own great identity.
That's really the thing. It's the identity. As someone who was playing Magic back then, it wasn't that white lacked strong cards. Swords of Plowshares, Disenchant, Balance, Armageddon, Wrath of God, plenty of plausible cards to build decks around. It is the absence of personality. Most of the things it does, it feels like it's sort of in a slightly different fashion than some other color, or the definition is sort of hard to tease out of the card file. And that's really the thing. Why do people play mono red even when red isn't particularly good? Because there's a feeling and a tone and an emotional experience associated with it. And the same is true, I would argue, of blue, green, and black more so than white. It's still an issue with Magic today. And going over the file here, you can find some interesting cards, some cool things to think about in all the colors except for white, unless you include Charizard.
Which I promise we will. That's it for the cycles. There are none. Hopefully there'll be some in future sets, and I think there will be. What we can tell you is there are a lot of misprints here in Arabian Nights, and we're going to go over all of them right after this. All right, it's misprints time here on our Arabian Nights episode of the Resleevables. There are quite a few. Now, no Douglas Schuler problems this time around, thank goodness, but there are some cards, and we've already talked about this a little bit, and this is going to be the bulk of this, the light versus dark thing.
Yeah. In
this set. Now, before I get into the cards that are commonly referred to as light versus dark, given that you do have some Arabian Nights cards, and this is your wheelhouse between knowing the set really well, playing during this time, and whatever late night browsing you're doing on your own, which quite a bit, trust me. Mm-hmm. How big of a deal is this light versus dark thing? Is this, you're talking to a collector and they know exactly what they're talking about, and you want, you're browsing, you're I want the dark version of that card, get the light version away from me, I don't want that, is this a big deal, is this a minor thing, what are we looking at here?
It's pretty subtle. Okay. So visually it's not as dramatic as the different sorts of frames they do with Magic nowadays. If I put one in front of you and said, is this light or dark, I think it would be better than a coin flip to get it right, but not substantially better.
Myself personally?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes,
just any Magic player who's been around for a little while.
Okay.
Also, because one is not really that much more desired than the other. One, because it's subtle, and two, because it's whatever, the same rarity. There's no collectivity to them really. That it never really mattered very much. I didn't know anyone who was really passionate about getting light cards versus dark cards. I think if you look at the secondary market for these cards, it's probably comparable. I'd be surprised if there was a big difference in any individual design, light versus dark. So, like I said, subtle, it's present, but it's not a big part of the experience. And even when I was playing, and this was more recent, no one really cared too much about it.
Okay. These are the following cards have two versions, light and dark. Urg Raiders, Obulette, Fish Liver Oil, Giant Tortoise, Nav's Asp, what's the wolf?
Wily Wolf.
Wily Wolf, Bird Maiden, Rook Egg, Army of Allah, Cavalry, excuse me, piety, is piety, Hasran Ogress, Stone Throwing Devils. Okay. Notes on the light versus dark. Has no generic mana symbols on the card. Light and dark versions can be differentiated by the dark mana symbols in the casting cost, which appear either light gray, light version, or pinkish gray, black version. And the black mana symbols on light versus dark versions of other Arabian Nights cards also differ in this manner. That's for Stone Throwing Devils. There's also War Elephant, and then there's Camel.
In my opinion, the color where the light versus dark is most pronounced is on the blue cards.
Okay.
So that's Giant Tortoise and Fish Liver Oil.
Okay. Got it. Light versions have lighter colorless and colored mana symbols and larger text than the colorless mana symbols. They look similar to mana symbols in other sets. Darker versions have darker colorless and colored mana symbols and smaller text than the colorless mana symbols. All uncommons in the set have dark version mana symbols. So, if you're looking for misprints or something unique about this set, and there's already a lot of uniqueness to this set because of the flavor and everything that's going on, it's that. It's the light versus dark. Okay. Now, there's the trivia aspect of things.
Okay.
With misprints and stuff. So I have a boatload of trivia to go over here with this set. So
and this is, are we doing the Q&A style this time?
No, we're just going to go over it. Because there's so many that like some of these might just hit you as like, you know these things, or you have a story because you generally have stories to tell. Okay. All right, so Aladdin depicts Aladdin as a Chinese man, which might seem a little bit strange, but despite now being arguably the most well-known Arabian Nights story, Aladdin was not originally part of the 1001 Arabian Nights. It was added to the collection by a French translator in the 1700s. The Aladdin story is actually set in China, and Aladdin himself is Chinese, so this is actually reflected accurately in the set.
Did not know that.
There you go. You're going to learn some stuff today on the Resleevables. Now this one, you do know. Aladdin's Lamp.
55 mana.
Boom. Had the most expensive casting cost of any card at the time of its printing. When it was printed, the icon of 10 in a gray circle representing a cost of 10 generic mana did not exist. So the casting cost was instead represented as 5, or 55. That's a lot.
Yeah, and this is an especially rough reprint, or misprint rather, because a lot of interpretations are plausible. Okay. It does say 55 mana on it. Even if that seems like that can't be the answer, that's what it says.
Sure.
You could also reasonably interpret it to mean 10 mana.
Okay.
You could also reasonably interpret it to mean 5 mana, and the misprint is the second 5.
Oh, sure. Okay.
The fact that this one did not get just reminder text, given how Magic would pretty liberally use clarification of how certain cards work. The fact that this doesn't have a devoid style, this costs 10 mana
yeah, sure.
in the text box is very weird to me.
Ali from Cairo was the first creature card added to the restricted list.
Yep.
Time to go. It was added in January 1994, removed in April 1996.
So I'm a little sympathetic towards this one because Ali from Cairo actually doesn't really play that well. The game's not very interesting once it comes down.
Yep.
It is extremely weak. And through that lens, it's funny to think about it as being a restricted card.
I just can't kill it.
It's also arguably stronger as a restricted card. Like having one copy in your sideboard for just someone who maybe randomly can't beat it, that's like the good thing to do with it. Just playing 4 in your main deck
That'd
like
be
people
really
did all
weird.
the time.
Yeah.
It was very bad. So this is on the list of cards that was arguably made more powerful by restricting it, in that people could no longer mess up and just play a ton of them.
Brassman, old Brassy,
Dealer,
inspired the creation of Goblin Dirigible and Goblin War Wagon, both those cards from Mirrodin Block, excuse me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And all sorts of creatures that, don't untap necessarily and have different ways of getting them up. Yeah.
City in a Bottle, which we've talked about a little bit already, is the only card in this set to reference the Sandman comic that inspired Arabian Nights. The Witches. Kumbaji?
Yeah, I know the pronunciations that we used when I was 15.
Oh, they were almost certainly correct.
Whether or not those are still correct, were they ever correct? I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah. Kumbaji Witches.
Know that we're doing the best that we can. Kumbaji is translated from Arabic to mean corrupt, so the card basically reads Corrupt Witches. Now let's talk about Dancing Scimitar. Had the greatest combined power and toughness among artifact creatures in Arabian Nights. It inspired the creation of Ensouled Scimitar and also It's the expansion symbol for the set.
Yeah. It was also just for a card that's a French vanilla, very cool.
Yeah. Dan Dan is mentioned in the flavor text of Dothy Trapper. So for you flavor text fans out there, of which I know there are many, there's that. Desert is the first common non-basic land.
Also, it is the inspiration for gates and similar designs. Desert is a card that just is its own thing, does something. If you don't play with anything that calls it out, still works just fine. But Desert Nomads and Camel call out Desert specifically. Mm-hmm. So for lands that sort of do something, but also get called out in some ways, Desert was the first one.
We have Desert Nomads. It's the first card to have a non-basic land walk ability.
Mm-hmm.
Getting all over that desert. Ebony Horse is the first card to have the ability to remove a creature from combat. Okay. Urg Raiders. The word Urg is translated from Arabic to mean desert. So, learn something new. Ooh, Urnam Jin. I wanted this card so bad when I was a kid. I just had no money. Yeah. But it's like the coolest looking card I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It has the greatest combined power and toughness among green creatures in the set. Urnham is an anagram of Herman, Richard Garfield's brother-in-law. So, it's a weird name, but that's the reason. And man, did I want that. It was Armageddon.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that deck and I loved Armageddon when I was a kid. I still love it. They're never going to make it again, but I loved it. I was like, I couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
But man, what a cool card.
Yeah, it was a dealer. And you play with brushlands, so they just don't even have a forest. Yeah.
So smart. Yeah, you get it. Flying Carpet. You were not happy when you learned this. Flying Carpet was functionally changed when it was reprinted in 6th edition, so that it no longer requires the sacrifice of the creature it targets when it's destroyed. So they're basically two different cards.
Right. And so is this. So the Flying Carpet in Arabian Nights, refresh my memory, is if the creature riding it dies, the carpet dies, or vice versa?
If the creature riding it dies, the carpet dies too.
That's actually, that's a worse version of the story, I think.
Okay.
Because what would make sense is I disenchant your carpet and then you fall to your death. I bolted the thing right in the carpet, and the carpet sort of just goes off into whatever.
It just trails into
It's a little
nowhere.
weird.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's all of that is secondary to functional errata in 6th edition. No good. Also, this card in 6th edition as rare, probably a rough open.
Maybe not a great rare.
Yep.
Maybe not. Gazban Ogre was the first card that changed control based on the state of the game. Gazban is translated from Arabic to mean treacherous.
Mm-hmm.
So, it could jump sides, basically. There's a green card. Was it Wild Dogs?
Yeah, and there
That's
was
the one that jumped?
Yeah,
around?
there was a 2/2 for one, and the Wild Dogs was the cycling one.
Okay, gotcha.
Oh, no, that's Gazban Ogre is...
That's the first one that can jump.
That's the 2/2 for one.
Yeah.
And then Wild Dogs is the much more powerful one because you can cycle it.
Yeah. Hazran Ogress is one of a few cards that refers to the gender of a creature in its name. Modern cards nowadays, as we all know, tend to have gender-neutral names. Hazran is translated from Arabic to mean hideous. Her Jackal. Her is translated from Arabic to mean gulch. We're learning stuff. If Biff Ifrit. The art from this card was mistakenly used for the reprint of Serendib Ifrit in Revised.
Yep.
If Biff is a childhood nickname for Richard Garfield's sister, Elizabeth, and was originally questioned by editor Beverly Marshall Sailing for not having an Arabian feel. So someone was like, I don't know about that, Richard. And Richard said, nah, you're doing it.
Yeah,
it's an homage.
It's not that weird. I mean, it is a bit of a stretch, but it's not. If it was Elizabeth Ifrit, you'd be like, come on, you can't.
Yeah, you can't do
you can't do that. If Biff, I think, is a fine abstraction if it's just a one-off in the set.
Island Fish.
Gisconius. Certified dealer.
Has the greatest combined power and toughness among all creatures in Arabian Nights.
Yeah.
How big again? 6'8"?
6'8".
6'8". Banger. Janun Ifrit. Janun is translated from Arabic to mean nasty. I got Jazam Jin. Finally get to talk about this card. Has the greatest combined power and toughness among black creatures in Arabian Nights. It's a 5/5. It was initially regarded as a bad card, as players did not immediately understand why one would want to play a card that damages its controller. Jazam is translated from Arabic to mean evil, so ultimately the card reads as Evil Jin, and it has since inspired the creation of multiple cost-effective cards that have drawbacks, like Yakora the Prisoner, Plague Sliver, and Phyrexian Scuda. So I know there's a little pushback on your side where, did people think it was bad? Maybe yes, maybe no. There was a drawback of it damaging you, but it was very large.
Okay, so do you remember the card Balduvian Hordes from Lions?
So that is, okay. This is around when I got started.
Okay.
2 RR, 5/5, not a 5/4. I think it's ETB. You discard a card at random or it dies.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, so that card at the pre-release of Alliances was $25.
Okay,
in like 1996.
that's a ton.
You could trade, if you got 4 Baldovian Hordes, you could trade that for a Mox. So don't tell me people didn't think that Juzam was good, because the only reason that Baldovian Horde had that kind of heat on it was because a 4-mana 5/5 was perceived to be, with a drawback, was perceived to be good.
Okay.
So that telling of history is a little bit true. Initially, there was some pushback, and there's a lot of negative costing cards in the set, so you kind of have to buy into it to sort of get what's going on. But people figured out pretty soon. There are 2 things going on that complicate matters here with Juzam, and Serendipity Free to a lesser degree. One is, if you look at Alpha, Beta, and Unlimited, the negative costed creatures, the big ones, Force of Nature, Lord of the Pit, Demonic Hordes, they are actually weaker than cards like Sarah Angel, Shivan Dragon, Maho Modi Dijin. And so players were sort of trained that the cards that did bad stuff to you were bad. Because at Alpha, Beta, and Unlimited, they are actually bad. You're just better off playing with Sarah Angels and such than the drawback creature.
Cards you're talking about, like Force of Nature, Demonic Hordes,
Right.
Lord of the Pit, like that hurts when it goes wrong.
There's an entire collection of creatures that are basically like, you play this, it's so hard to get out there, and then if your opponent has Armageddon, you lose on the spot because you can't pay the upkeep anymore. And even if they don't have Armageddon, they probably have a Terror or something.
Sure.
So why are you going through all this headache? So one is players were trained that these cards were not very strong, which was true. Second, with the drawback creatures in Alpha, Beta, and Unlimited, they're at least very dramatic. You look at Force of Nature, and maybe you think it's bad or good, but it's definitely the biggest thing you own.
Okay.
And that tells you, like, yeah, the juice is worth the squeeze, you know, like you're getting the biggest creature on the block and there's an upkeep cost, but it's worth it. You look at Juzamjin and you compare it to Crawlworm. You look at Serendipity Free, you compare it to a Phantom Monster. It's like, you do have to be pretty good at Magic to identify Serendip and Juzam as being way stronger than the other ones. Not just a little bit stronger, but a lot stronger. So some of it is the overrate, but a really subtle drawback is often less appealing than very, very big with very, very dramatic drawback. And then also players were trained that the drawback cards were weaker because they actually were in Magic's first set.
We're going to go to Kurt Ape. Banned in the extended format when it was first created. Kurd is also translated from Arabic to mean jungle, but this 1/1 that can turn into a 2/3, too good.
Can I tell you my first ever Vorthos moment involves Kurt Ape?
Absolutely.
So Kurt Ape was in Revised
Okay.
as a reprint, and so, you know, I got used to that card pretty quickly in my Magic career.
Okay.
Savannah Lions, also in Revised.
1 mana, 2/1.
Yeah. So Taiga Kurt Ape was like, that's the thing to do. And I remember thinking, that should be Savannah Lions. Because Savannah Lions would be so sweet if that was the 2/3.
Okay.
Like Loam Lion.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
thought Savannah Lion should have been Loam Lion when I saw Kurt Ape for the first time.
Okay.
Because it's like, yeah, Savannah Lions. What a sick opening that would be.
That makes sense.
That was like my Vorthos game designery instinct at age 15.
That's where you just got started.
That is where I
Yeah.
got started. Yeah.
Yeah.
Savannah Lions really bothered me that Kurt Ape had that power and Savannah Lions didn't.
Where's the Kurd forest or something, even though Kurd means forest? Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I guess Kurtex, it means jungle. Library of Alexandria was supposedly made less powerful in development, inspired the creation of Scroll of Origins, a different Magic card. Library is already pretty powerful, so I can only imagine how they nerfed it.
Yeah, I don't even know. I mean, you know, we have a frame of reference now for Library of Alexandria being a good but controversial card in Vintage Q. People have very different ratings for it. It's very, very rare to see this card in competitive Vintage to the extent that exists. It's like for standstill decks, basically.
Mm-hmm.
This was probably the strongest card in Magic at the time it got printed because the game was played so slowly. And the best stuff to do was just play with counter spells and build out your mana with Moxes and Soul Rings and stuff. This card was absolutely cracked when it came out, and for several years after that in Type 1. It's only when the game started to speed up dramatically where this card became no longer the absolute best card in the game. Like, when we were first building decks, competitive Vintage decks, we had a very limited budget, and so we would sit down and sort of like stack rank what were the highest priority cards to get.
Okay.
Like cost versus power level.
Sure.
Library was number one, not
It had
close.
to be by a lot.
Like one, should we get 3 library of Alexandrias or 1 Black Lotus? It's like, we're not going to cast anything good with a Black Lotus. We have a library Alexandria against these buffoons. We're going to sit there, draw a bunch of cards, mana drain their Shivan Dragon, and then, amnesia their hand.
And we'll figure it out from there.
Turn on my Mistress Factory.
Yeah, sure.
Play a moat, like whatever. So if you're playing Magic at that time, you have a very different understanding of this card and appreciation for it than if you're newer to the game and you know it kind of as a modern, like very, 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 very fringe vintage playable card and good, but kind of archetype specific vintage cube card.
Let's go to Naf's Asp. Nafs is translated from Arabic to mean hidden. Amulet. An amulet is a dungeon with an entrance only from above. Richard Garfield designed this card in part because of the movie Labyrinth, and its rules were rewritten in 2005 to contain phasing, but in 2007 rephrased again to contain exile. Then in 2020, with its printing in double masters, it reverted to phase out again.
I think phase out sucks.
It's
so bad for the story.
Okay.
It just doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
Exile and then bring back that's a prison story.
Sure.
Phase has this tone of transmutation or traveling through dimensions. I think they lost the plot on that reprint.
Old Man of the Sea was printed as Summon Merid. I believe that's how it's pronounced. Merid being Arabic for rebel. It has since been updated with the Jinn creature type, as we mentioned earlier. Repentant Blacksmith is the first creature printed with protection from red, which was considered a powerful enough ability that the card was made an uncommon.
And also was a key element of changing the protection from color versus trample rules.
Okay.
So that was an interesting question in early Magic. If I block your Force of Nature with a 1/1 with protection from green, does damage go 1/7 or 8?
Sure.
For a while, the rules worked 8. So Repentant Blacksmith was a popular sideboard card for a time, specifically against Ball Lightning.
Oh.
Because it would take the whole, it would just lock out a Ball Lightning. And eventually they changed the trample rules against protection to just say, you assign up to toughness, and then the rest comes
through.
Yeah.
Okay. That's probably correct. Let's see. I got the ring here. Ring of Maruf.
Hell yeah.
Is the first card to allow interaction with cards outside the game. Its ability to retrieve a card from outside the game was very unique at the time, obviously, until it inspired the creation of one of my favorite cycles when we get to Judgment, the Wish cycle.
And there's a lot of heat on Karn, the Great Creator, back when the Wishes were more recent. A lot of heat on the Wishes. Why was that never the case with Ring of Maruf?
Because the cards that could get stunk?
Because there's only one, and it's not that good.
Yeah.
Again, that lesson comes back of there's a lot you can do that kind of doesn't work or maybe comes with some risk if there's just one version of it and it's not that strong.
Sure.
When you make a bunch of Wishes and many of them are quite good, or you make Karn Great Creator, now you start feeling some of those issues that come along with going to other zones and how do card types work on double-sided cards, with blah, blah, blah,
sure,
blah, blah,
it becomes a huge mess that we've seen.
Right, yeah. Ring of Maruf never caused any problems. Because if your opponent played Ring of Maruf, they were not going to win.
Yeah, sure. I got the Sandals. Sandals of Abdallah inspired the creation of Lightning Greaves, which is a really cool card. As footwear, was discovered to be a class of armor and weapons that had not been explored much in Magic when equipment was first being created.
This is really cool because there are some versions of what I would describe as tonal equipment in Alpha Beta Unlimited. Helm of Chatsuk, there's some armor pieces, whatever. The fact that here it's sandals and flying carpet, it's really cool. What's happening with these is not because it's some battle axe you're hacking someone down with or some suit of armor where now you're immune to everything. There's like these little magical items that do nifty stuff.
Yeah.
Very, very cool.
And then last one here. This one's maybe a little chit chat here. The old stone throwing devils.
Okay.
All right. It upsets some people, as stone throwing devils is sometimes used as a derogatory term for Palestinian protesters in Israel.
Well, I would say that usage is definitely used more often than describing a 1/1 first striker for a single black mana.
That sounds correct.
Frequency matters a lot with this stuff too.
Yeah. So over the course of the past couple of years,
mm-hmm.
Magic has Lost some cards doesn't sound correct. There's been some cards that have been deemed not great.
Right.
How about that?
Yeah, and I think that people's sensibilities about this stuff can land in different places.
Sure.
I think that grading on or some level of, if not grading on a curve, understanding that some social justice norms that we hold today in 2023 is different than in 1994 and 1995. It's part of the reason that your creative teams should have a mix of races and genders and life experiences to catch this sort of stuff. So that's one thing. The second other hand of this is, so Stone Throwing Devils is just a slur.
Yes.
Even if the art actually just depicts devils, it's still just a slur.
Yep.
And then the real doozy to me is jihad.
Okay.
So jihad literally translates to struggle.
Okay.
There's nothing intrinsically race war-y about it at a baseline. I know in certain discourses now that's like the interpretation, but that's not really what the word means. Jihad can be applied to a lot of different interpersonal or interpersonal struggles that someone could go through. The actual design of jihad in this set is a race war. You name a color, and as long as your opponent has anything of that color, all your things get stronger. And then when everything of that color goes away from your opponent, jihad goes away.
So does jihad.
So that to me is now entering territory where it's no longer about, well, it's different perspective, updating norms. Someone made like a race war card and called it jihad.
Yeah.
That's no good, and that's correct to get rid of it.
Yes.
Should Army of Allah, which is again encroaching on some maybe dangerous territory or tropes, but the card itself is a pretty generic combat trick. That to me is towing the line. In 2023, you probably shouldn't make a card called Army of Allah, but if you're making an Arabian Nights set and it's 1994, to me it's kind of like shrug your shoulders at that a little bit. Jihad is not good. You should not do that.
It wasn't good then.
No.
It's not good now.
Right.
Right. So just, that's a card. Stone Throwing Devil's another card that if you do a gatherer search for these cards or go to Scryfall or, a couple of other search engines, they're gone.
Right.
They're just gone. You won't be able to find them. Which, there's positives and negatives to that, right? The positives, I think, are pretty obvious. These are not cards that Magic wants to have forward-facing and, being things that they're showcasing and be proud of. But at the same time, it is part of the game's history. And I'm a big proponent, personally, of the history is the history, and you can't erase the history.
So I know that this has come up with Warner Brothers because in the late 1930s and early to mid 1940s, they made a lot of pro-American, anti-Nazi propaganda films. You can find these things on YouTube. And at a certain point, you've got to make a call of, do we sort of destroy this, disavow these, try to attack YouTube to pull down every copy of this video? And Warner Brothers said, they released a statement that said, in essence, if we did that, we feel like we were trying to hide it. Like we tried to pretend that it didn't exist.
Sure.
I don't know how to counterbalance all this kind of stuff.
That's tricky.
To me, like jihad crosses a very obvious line of appropriateness and indulging racist and religious tropes that it should never have been printed in the first place. What's the harm of pulling down one card off of Gatherer in a game with 12,000 cards? Pretty minimal in my opinion. On the other hand, trying to act like it didn't happen to me is a little bit bizarre. The fact that there is some inconsistencies, like why this but not that, makes it a little bit weird too. But at the end of the day, I find this design, like, I know we're kind of joking about it, but it is so repulsive that I kind of don't care.
Yes.
There are some examples to me that are sort of treading into that. Well, isn't this like, are we sure? Is this part of history? But to me, jihad is like so far out of bounds that it doesn't really trigger that kind of a response from me.
I would agree with you on that. And that does it for our misprints and for our trivia portion of the episode, which means we got one thing left. It's award show time right after this. All right, it's time for your favorite part of the Resleevables. It's time for our favorite part of the Resleevables. It's time for the award show. So we're going to start things off as we always do by giving out the award for the best card of the set. It's our Oko Thief of Crowns award. And as always, I'm going to let you begin.
So I try to grade these things on a curve of how strong was it at the time. Also, how strong was the card over sort of Magic's history. So not just like what's the best card in 2023, but what's the best card in the lifespan of this set. To me, the answer is Library of Alexandria. It was at various points the best card in Vintage. And it is a card where if we just played sealed deck and one of us got a Library of Alexandria, it would just be game over. Compare that to some of the other cards in the set that are also quite good, but are more about scaling with larger card pools.
My answer is Bazaar of Baghdad, which I don't do the same grading. I have the same scale as you do. Now, if we look at modern Magic, look, Bazaar, I don't know exactly when it got cracked. It probably got most cracked when Dredge was...
Yeah, if we're talking about 2023, it is not close. It's Bazaar of Baghdad.
Sure.
The card is absolutely correct.
Yeah, it's preposterous in modern Magic.
Yeah.
It didn't start that way, but over the course of, again, Dredge is the big outlier, reanimation strategies, the fact that the game was starting to be designed around your graveyard being an additional resource, yeah, the card is crazy good. So I agree with your Library of Alexandria analysis, and with the way that you were grading things, it makes a lot of sense. I'm taking a more modern approach for my best card, and yeah, Bazaar is, come on.
No objection. Yeah, I mean, if it was a card that was suddenly legal in Legacy or Modern, it would be preposterous. But also, if you open up your sealed deck, you would never play it. So it's just, but through the lens of 2023 constructed, yeah, it's Bazaar. It's not close.
Carnival of Souls Award for the worst card in the set is where we go next. I am going to submit Fish Liver Oil, giving a creature Island Walk I'm not convinced is worth a card.
Okay, it's not. My answer here was Bird Maiden.
Okay.
Partially because it is very, very weak, and partially because it was, in spite of Magic only having 350 cards by the time the set came out, it was already obsolete. Granite
Sure.
Gargoyle was the exact same mana cost, was a 2/2 flyer with another power. So Bird Maiden's pretty rough. I would like to give sort of a nod to...
Perhaps an honorable mention?
Honorable mention to Pyramids.
Okay.
The anti-Stone Ring card that costs 6 mana and then 2 to activate. It's
expensive.
Like, what problem is this solving? Like, I already have 8 mana. Do I really need that much protection?
I like the idea of someone showing up to like the local game or whatever and just being like, I got something for you. I'm tired of this. And they like play Pyramids and it just does not work the way they want it to.
So I watched a game in my local shop. Someone had Pyramids for like the sideboard.
Yeah.
Eugene Harvey is just like, turn 1, land Soul Ring. Pyramids player plays a land. And Eugene then goes, land Nether Void.
Come on.
And then the Stone Rains start ice storms and stone rains and sinkholes and strip mines, you name it. Nether Void, very good against Pyramid.
True.
And many other cards as well.
Sure. Turns out, yeah, pretty good card. We're going to move on to the Doomblade Award. Again, we changed this for our YouTube version of the show. It is now the best non-rare in the set. Your answer is, do you remember?
I don't recall. Is it Oubliette?
It is not. Yes, it is.
Yeah,
Take it
okay.
back, yes. Explanation?
Just a solid, straightforward removal spell. It is a Doomblade of sorts. Mm-hmm. It was good enough that I know this only existing in Arabian Nights was problematic for Pauper for a while.
Okay.
It was a card that was asked to be reprinted because it was so useful in Pauper and only available in Arabian Nights.
Okay.
So yeah, a workmanlike card, something that if you printed today, it would get probably played a little bit. Was useful at the time. That's my answer.
Give me the ape. Give me the Curd Ape. Just a nice, honest creature.
Curd Ape rules.
1 mana, 1/1. Got to do a little work. Nowadays, not much work to make it into a 2/3. Nothing wrong with a 1 mana 2/3. By today's standards, even then, I don't think that was that outrageous.
No, it was cool. It also encouraged, it was a low rarity card that encouraged building multicolor decks.
There you go. Beautiful,
awesome. Beautiful
card. Oboro, Palace in the Clouds Award for fun of, one of in the set. My answer is Drop of Honey, which you own one of those. It's a powerful card. It's not a card you want to play a lot of copies of. When I think of Drop of Honey, the first person that comes to mind, Jarvis, here's looking at you, buddy. If memory serves, won a Legacy Grand Prix in Seattle with lands and had access to Drop of Honey, if memory serves. Jarvis, I hope you're watching. I hope you're doing well, and I hope I have this story correct.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing a creatureless deck and your opponent's playing a curve of creatures, Drop of Honey's pretty correct.
Yes. So that's my answer. But you don't want multiples.
Typically not, no. My answer would be Diamond Valley, card that, one, I really appreciate this design because you can just play it kind of at the surface level and just sack your stuff, gain some life in response to things. And it really opens up some sacrifice matter strategies that didn't really exist at the time. It didn't have architecture for the design at the time. But again, you can only play so many copies of this because it does not make mana.
Yeah.
And requires you to have a pretty specific setup to start doing good stuff. But back in the day, I saw people play with one copy of this in their decks and it did stuff and it was fun and cool.
Yeah, and it is a very fun and cool card. Mystic Confluence Award for the best vintage cube card in the set. Well, we have the same answer.
It's Library of Alexandria.
It's not close.
I'm sorry. You can say, I just really like building multicolor decks where I don't want a colorless land, or library's just not good unless into your opening hand. And if you're playing mono white or mono red, the colorless land again can be like not the thing that you want. Respect all that. There's so many games of Vintage Cube where someone just goes turn one library and it's like, okay, it's over.
Sure. Sure.
They're going to draw 5 extra cards for 1 mana over the course of the game. Just like it was in Vintage in 1995. And also there aren't really any contenders in here.
Yeah, that's the bigger problem is that there's, the only other real contender when we were taking a look was Bazaar. But I think Library is better than Bazaar. Bazaar is also only good in Vintage Cube if there's a graveyard sub-theme. Mm-hmm. If you remove like the Reanimator deck or like anything graveyard related, it's not good. And Library is good in all versions of Vintage Cube. Even though I'm not a Library person, been vocal about this on the old interwebs, it's still the best card in here for Vintage Cube by a lot.
I don't even know what number 3 would be on this in this set. Really strange.
Yeah,
it's like Old Man of the Sea. It's probably the 3rd best card for Vintage Cube. So you're really only talking about the 2 lands.
Yeah. We're going to go to the Smothering Tide Award for best commander card in the set. Speaking of Old Man of the Sea, that is my pick. I have no idea if this card sees playing commander. I apologize, commander fans. It's not my wheelhouse. But I feel like if it's legal, it would see play. Seems like a nice commander card.
Was my answer here Diamond Valley?
No, you went with the If Biff Ifrit.
Oh, If Biff Ifrit. Yeah, this was sort of like the first. So again, Diamond Valley is just sort of set up naturally for games of Commander. You like to sacrifice stuff. You like to have stuff to do on other people's turns. Playing with a land that doesn't make mana is not as taxing in that format as it is in competitive formats. So it works pretty well there. If Biff Ifrit is kind of, in some ways, the first Commander card. The stuff that all came out before Legends, the Legend super type. And If Biff Ifrit is very interesting in multiplayer games. Unfortunately, it gets to a point where there's enough players where it just dies. Like, there's just enough green mana floating around that it's like...
dies to its own ability.
Bing, bing, bing. And you just never get back to it. But in a 4-player game, it's not determined that's going to happen and does some stuff and is fun.
Let's go for the Pack Rat Award for best limited card in the set. Now, look, we understand not a lot of people playing Arabian Nights limited or sealed deck.
It doesn't work very well.
No.
There's no lands.
That's part of the problem.
You can only play red.
Yeah. It's gonna make it tough.
And then unfortunately, if I have a Bird Maiden and you have a Bird Maiden, they just bounce off each other.
This,
so it just comes
all
down
day.
So even if you can cast it, it just comes down to decking.
Yeah. But if we kind of take some liberties here, we have the same answer once again.
It's Library of Alexandria.
It's Library of Alexandria.
Yeah. If you open that in a sealed deck,
can you imagine?
Over.
Yeah.
Over. You kidding me?
We're going to go to the Char Rumbler Award for the weirdest card in the set. You made fun of pyramids already, so I will do it again. Your answer is significantly better than mine, so I'm not going to take too much time here. Pyramid sucks. It's really weird. It doesn't even solve the problem, technically, that it's trying to solve.
Not even close.
Costs 6 mana where it should probably cost... I think pyramids could effectively cost 1 and still not be very good.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Like, because at least it's like, okay, I play this on turn 1, and then turn 2, I'm like defending my lands, or I have a decision to make about if I want to defend my lands or play a spell. 6 mana is outrageous.
And it's so bad in this case, too. Well, sometimes cards can be weak. That's fine. But this is protecting the right person. It's someone who's sick of all of their lands getting blown up.
Sure.
And you're just giving them a card that, so transparently, 1, just doesn't work.
Yep.
And 2, is going to be so much more annoying to see in your hand when all of your lands are gone. Like I said,
Drew my answer.
I drew my answer. Like I said, it's fine to do some cards that are weak, but this one I think is so over the line weak, and it is solving a real problem that existed at the time. The Stone Rains were low rarity and quite strong, so this one is a big miss.
Yeah, a stinker. Now, your answer, significantly better than mine.
Shahrazad.
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, if you'll allow me a moment here, I'm going to go to my Arabian Nights deck because I do own one. I want to read this card.
Oh, yes, please read it word for word.
Okay.
Would be great.
So white sorcery. This is the printed text. Maybe it's different now in Gather or whatever, but players must leave game in progress. So this is the first giveaway something bad is going to happen. It doesn't say the game. It says game because there's so much text that they have to start removing words like the and to get the thing to fit. Okay, back up. Players must leave game in progress as it is and use the cards left in their libraries as decks with which to play a subgame of Magic. Magic italicized. I believe this is the only instance in the history of the game because it's referring to Magic, the brand and the copyrighted trademark.
I'm going to guess. A quick interjection. I want to guess that there's probably Magic italicized in like some unglued card. Maybe.
When subgame is over, not the subgame again, the removed to make room. When subgame is over, players shuffle these cards, return them to libraries, and resume game in progress, with any loser of subgame having his or her remaining life points rounded down. Effects that prevent damage may not be used to counter this loss of life. This subgame has no ante, using less than 40 cards may be necessary. So, this is pretty rough. Because, let's say you're new to Magic and you're just you're hanging out, whatever. You've got bought some packs, whatever. And your opponent's just turn 2 Charizard. Reading this and you're just I'm never playing this game. Just no chance. Doesn't really work that well in a competitive setting. In fact, it's essentially banned for pretty close to the same reason that Chaos Orb is banned. Tournament rules cannot accommodate this card being legal.
Sure.
Because you can just keep casting it. So if you have 4 of them, you're just subgaming into subgames.
You are demonstrating the loop.
Yeah. So you just subgame lock your opponent.
Yep.
And it is plausible that if it was legal, that you would play 4 copies of it if you won game 1. You have 4 in your sideboard for if you won game 1.
Oh, to lock them.
Yeah, because you just time out.
Oh, I love that.
Right? So it's not even implausible that it could show up in a tournament setting because the tournament rules can't accommodate this card being legal.
Sure.
So it's not just theory cracked. It's a real thing. And it's just not that much fun. Even if you set aside the whole looping thing, which you can't really, that's what the card is about. You could just play 2 games instead. Instead of playing 1 miserable game with a sub game, you could just play 2 games.
Why don't we just play again?
Just play again. That's another thing that I bring up. Another reductive little philosophy of mine when it comes to game design is we just play again.
Sure.
We don't, what's the reason to not make Sphinx's Revelation Blue-White Control the best deck in Standard? It's a variety of reasons. But one of them is we could just play another game. We could play 2 games instead. We could play 2 fun games or 1 a horrible game. What sounds better to you? What's nice about 2 fun games is 1, they're fun, and 2, a common result is you and I each win 1.
Oh, that's fun.
And then we want to play again.
And then, we could play a 3rd game to see who won the series.
Right, exactly. And they're still in their 2nd sub game.
Yeah.
They've moved from the kitchen table to the kitchen floor to the basement. Sure. Just sub game locked all the way down. Impossible to track anything. And the sub game is also you win the sub game and it's just half your life. So the more sub game
rounded down.
Right. If you're at 1, you're dead.
Yeah.
But there is this, at what point does anything ever happen?
Sure.
If you played a game with Charizard at the end of it, you would be I don't even really know what happened.
Sure.
Terrible card. I do own one because it's hilarious to me.
I agree.
Reading this card is just so funny. They removed every instance of the word the because otherwise the card cannot fit in the text box.
Gotta fit it in there. I do. What's the last line on that again?
The subgame has no ante.
Okay. And then it was
God.
And then it was
Using less than 40 cards may be necessary.
That one I like. Maybe
Also,
they're not even sure if it's necessary.
Well, that's also the giveaway of using less than 40 cards may be necessary. Is like, why would they say that? It's like, oh, because we're gonna get decked a bunch in the sub games. That's why. Okay, not a great design.
Let's go to the blank award for best card name in the set. A lot of good choices here because this is an extremely flavorful set, so it's going to hit for you at home differently than it might hit for us. I'm going to go with City of Brass. Just a really cool sounding card. The artwork on the card is outrageously good too. And I just think it's a cool card. I think it's a cool name for a card.
It is a cool name for a card.
You're doing
There's
the twist.
a lot of cool. What's up?
You're doing the twist.
Desert Twister. What I really appreciate about this one is one of the challenges for this set, in my opinion, is how do you express the color pie? Because Arabian Nights, that setting, you could say it has mountains. You could fudge it a little bit and say it has plains, or like the facsimile plains. Forest, island, and swamp is a little bit tricky. And so with green and black in particular. So how do you go about expressing green and black when the sort of what are the woodland creatures or what lives in the swamp isn't available to you? And natural disasters feeling very naturey is a cool way of pulling that off. So I appreciate that even though Desert Twister is pretty color pie breaking, one, it's expensive. So that is part of what defines a color pie is what rate are you getting this at? Desert Twister is quite expensive, so that helps even though it's a little color pie breaking. And two, it does some work to define green in a file where there isn't a forest.
Yeah, in this very strange world where, yeah, like you said, like no woodland creatures or anything would show up.
Right.
Yeah.
Or they'd be exceedingly rare.
Yes.
So how do you do green in that world where forests are very rare? And I think this card does a lot of work towards making it make some sense.
Weird impromptu question. Do you think that Desert Twister is the first breaking of the color pie in Magic's history?
Well, it depends how you want to define that exactly. Because you can go to Alpha and find cards that are really dissonant with the color pie. But rate matters and rarity matters a lot. Like green's not supposed to get flying very much. Yep. So how do you feel about script sprites?
Okay.
It's like tricky, right? Because, okay, so green doesn't have flying creatures typically. But if you went into a magical forest, you would certainly see some creatures flying around. Even if you went into a non-magical forest, you would see birds and eagles and stuff.
Sure.
So the fact that script sprites and Birds of Paradise exist and they're very small and they're both 1 mana and they fly, and that's, I mean, Birds of Paradise obviously attached for mana, but they really don't have abilities that are particularly complicated. Is that color pie breaking or does that help define the color pie? I think you can answer that either way. It's like, this is how green does flying. Is that more or less powerful in terms of defining the pie than green just hard line, no flying?
Just has no flying, yeah.
It's interesting. It's complicated. Desert Twister is a pretty egregious example of breaking color pie. I don't know if it's worse than, I don't know. There's a bunch of examples in Alpha. Like Rook of Care Ridges is a really weird design. Like just a 3/3 flyer for 4 in red. What's that all about?
Sure.
When it's like dragons and fire breathing is the way they do it. And it's an exact replica of a blue card.
Yeah, that's a replica of what, Phantom Monster?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay. I don't know. But Desert Twister is definitely out there. But again, it's a set where the normal parameters for what you would do with green are hard to execute because there's just not a lot of vegetation, forestry, and a lot of green tropes lean on that stuff. So, maybe not an ideal card to do, but making it expensive. Okay. So you're paying up for it.
Making it expensive is a good solve.
At 4 mana, it's in your face.
Yeah.
Now it's a card you're supposed to be playing all the time.
Yeah.
And you really feel how color pie breaking it is. At 6, it's like, okay, so green gets to do this sometimes, and it makes sense because natural disasters can destroy a lot of stuff discreetly or widely, but it's not as good as like black or red would get for this sort of thing.
Let's go to the blank award for the best card name in the set. We just did that. We're going to go to the John Avon Award for the best land artwork in the set. Excuse me. Bizarre Baghdad for me.
That's cool.
Beautiful artwork. There's really not a lot to say. Just look at it. The name of the card, the picture evokes the name of the card. It does everything it's supposed to do. It's a very, very good looking card.
Yeah, my answer is Island of Walk Walk. I think the way that it's a very simple art piece, but the way that it's sort of between the angle and the scale intimates something very magical and cool and like floating castle-y is really sweet for an art piece that is, like I said, pretty simple in terms of what's actually on there.
As mentioned during our Alpha Beta Unlimited episode, our Aurelius Fury Award for most overhyped card during previous season and our Tarmogoyf Award for most underhyped card during previous season we will not be able to do for the first handful of sets because there weren't preview seasons for these early sets of Magic's history. So when we can include them, we will, but we don't want people to forget about them because we know that those are some of people's favorite awards that we do during the show, which means we only have 2 things left to do. Patrick, what card won Arabian Nights and why?
Juzam Jin. So first of all, it's kind of the most important element of the set is the Jins and Ifrits and all these oversetted creatures with drawbacks. That's really what defines how the set plays. And Juzam is very simple. It's still one of Magic's most iconic pieces of art. They still use it in ads and stuff, and it's a very valuable card on the secondary market, even though it has no competitive value. It's just a collector's item. And it was a card that sort of informed players that cards can have drawbacks or negative costing and still be quite strong. And it plays pretty well, like on balance. You put Juzam in a standard, it probably wouldn't show up nowadays, but there's plenty of times in Magic's history where it would have been fine and does its thing and plays okay. Another thing that I like about Juzam is creatures with that sort of every turn tax, they give a different definition to removal. Like I remember when pacifism came out for the first time, I was like, oh, well, why would you play with this instead of Source of Plowshares? And it's like, well, swordsing as Juzam's pretty modest. Pacifying of Juzam, now you're doing it.
That's good.
Right. So it gives context to different sorts of removal interaction that you can't just get with, creatures that don't have those sort of drawbacks.
For me, it is Library of Alexandria. I don't know do you think most iconic card do you think it's the most well-known card from this set?
I think that really depends on the level at which you play Magic and how long you've been around for. For people in my age range who they're in their 40s, they played competitive type 1 back when that was a thing. It is Library. It was just such a defining piece of that experience. I think nowadays either Juzam or Bazaar of Baghdad would be more likely someone's answer.
Yep.
But Library is definitely part of that, Venn diagram or whatever.
I think those are the big 3, right? And so for me, again, even though I'm not a big Library fan in Vintage Cube, I do understand Library's history. As you've mentioned, over the course of this episode, it was a very, very powerful card. Really defined Vintage and everything else way back when, before I was playing. The card still does see a little bit of fringe play now, but also you own a couple of libraries, and I think that speaks volumes about the card. Not that you don't own any Juzam Jins, right?
I don't. It's on my list of if one popped up, I'm vaguely in the market, but sure. I'm not actively flogging down.
It's the kind of card library where if you say I own a Library of Alexandria, it's dude. So that's awesome.
Yeah, interestingly enough, of what are the most expensive cards I've never owned in my entire life? I think Juzam is number 4 on the list. Believe it or not,
very precise.
Yeah, Lotus, Time Twister, Workshop, Juzam.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, back in the day, they were hard to find. They were already expensive. It wasn't very much of it, and if you want to play with it, you need 4. A lot of the most popular and powerful cards were restricted at that point. Juzam was you need 4. Yeah, and there weren't that many of them.
Because the print run not very large for this set, so that makes sense. Yeah, so for me, it's just kind of an iconic card. It's a very powerful card. Even the artwork for the card, we see that as prizes for things and backgrounds on people's computers and stuff like that. And it's just a card that when I think of Arabian Nights, it's a card I think of, and it's also flavorful on top of that.
Yeah, and also it's a really cool design insofar as the tap for a colorless or tap or something else after Alpha Beta Unlimited, where that design space was unexplored, is just a huge step forward in Magic's evolution. I mean, we talk about these sets not really having mechanics, which is true to a point. There's not a keyword that gets referenced over and over again, but the way the lands got executed, the desert being sort of precursor to gates, things like lifelink appearing, cumulative upkeep in discrete designs, for a set that only had 70 some odd unique designs or whatever, there is quite a bit of design space here that Magic has carried forward into 2023.
And now our final question. Give the set a grade
It pains me to say, but I have to give Arabian Nights a 9, not a 10. I think for a set that is this small, the amount of drawback creatures, like 3, 4, 5 mana creatures with a drawback that are overstated, it's just the same note too many times. I think that you could take probably 2 or 3 of the Jin Ifrits out and make some just creatures that did some stuff that weren't super drawbacky and have a better file. And also, these aren't even the only drawback creatures, like Urg Raiders, Gazban Ogre, Kambaj Witches. Like, there is a lot of negative costing kind of woven through this set. So I have to ding it a little bit for that. It's just too much the same note. But in terms of being evocative for the time and place, for making some huge step forward in Magic design space, and for really one of the greatest achievements of the set, there's like a lot of pretty strong cards here that don't play badly. When we go through the next few sets, we're going to see a lot of instances of this set has 4 or 5 good cards and they're miserable.
Sure.
This has a bunch of, Juzem, Serendipity Freet. That's sweet. Some of these lands, City of Brass, these are plausible cards in 2023, and they were appealing and powerful at the time, and they still sort of hold up. And that's quite the accomplishment for a set that's, 30 years in the past and only has a couple dozen cards in it in the first place.
I'm going to give it a 7. I initially was going to give it an 8. I've decided to give it a 7 for a couple of reasons. One, I feel like I got to save my 8s and my 9s, right? I don't want to just be dishing those out willy-nilly.
I am in the opposite place.
Okay.
I need to save my 1s and 2s.
Okay, fair enough.
Get my X and dimes out of the way.
Fair enough. I'm trying to save my high scores. I know I gave ABU our last episode a 10, and I think it is a 10. I don't even think it's a discussion.
You can't. How could you be confident in changing anything about that set, given how successful it is?
We're not even here without ABU. So, okay. This one, I think it did get a lot of things right, especially for Magic's first expansion. And, flavor-wise, did a good job. Not perfect, but they did a good job. There are some struggles. I mean, everything you said about Desert Twister and green and how you're supposed to make green work in this set, I think it's all accurate, right? And then there are the bad cards are pretty bad, which that happens. They're still figuring things out. Not a lot of cards. I don't know how many cards are technically supposed to be in your first expansion. There's not a ton here. I mean, I'll give credit to them. Not a lot of mistakes. Yeah, which was actually kind of surprising.
The only card I would say that you would have buyer's remorse about in this set at the time, and now who even cares, is Library of Alexandria. It's the only card in the set that's really powerful and plays badly.
Yeah.
Everything else is just
whatever. Just stuff.
Right.
Like some of the cards are really bad, and the other cards, like you mentioned, Juzam and other stuff, it's like, I don't know, it's just like kind of a big creature.
Even like Whirling Dervish. There's just like cards that you could print now that would be like fine in draft and play okay.
Yeah. So I think it's totally fine. It's definitely an above average set, but I'm not going to fire a 9 out there just yet. I want to save my 9, I want to save my 8s, and I'm going to give it a confident 7, which is actually my favorite number. So it's actually a good score for Arabian Nights. So do you know what set comes next?
I believe it's Antiquities.
That is correct. That is what is on the docket. Do you have anything to look forward to with Antiquities before we close this episode out?
So we've gone from Alphabet Unlimited, which is just let's lay down sort of the architecture of this game and the plane of Dominaria in a very open-ended way.
Okay.
And then and there are some mechanics of sorts, the creature keywords, some individual designs that suggest a deck, but it's really just kind of some stuff to play with. And then we have Arabian Nights, which is pulling from, real world, either actual real world places or storytelling from the real world. And the mechanics are even looser than an Alphabet Unlimited, but there's a tone. And there's some fun stuff to fiddle around with. Now, how about go from that execution to every single card in this set is either an artifact, references artifacts, or is a land that taps for colorless mana. 100% of the designs. Let's go completely in the opposite direction. This set is going to be about something, and it is artifacts, and you're going to know it from every single card you look at in the set. Which is that's also a step forward. That is cool. It is cool, but it is intense.
It is in your face.
It's in your face.
Yeah.
So get ready for it.
We hope you like artifacts. And if you don't, too bad, because they're coming and there's a lot of them. And we will see you for that on our next episode. Yeah, we're going to be done with this easily before 3 o'clock. Yeah. You know why, John? Because we're one take guys.
We're professionals.
Yeah, that's why.
Even among professionals, we're professionals. Riffle shuffling like $5,000 stack of cards.
They're just cards.
They're just cards. Get over it.
Lean back.
Look at that curvature. That's the way these cards are supposed to look.